so many of you in the room already, I might get started a little bit earlier, if that's okay with you. I'm so sorry that there's no room for you to sit, but I am, for the first time, glad that we, that we got such a great turnout for this topic because it's so important.
Leon's not getting out enough signal.
Sarah Gellert is not here. I'm not Sarah Gellert. My name is Ron Abi Astor. Sarah was unfortunately hospitalized for an infection, and she wasn't able to be here. And she was one of the main organizers who was literally working on this with Victoria Montgomery almost every day for the past 3 or 4 months or longer. I'm sorry that she's not here. Hopefully she's watching from the hospital, the live streaming on NASW and on ARA. But since I'm one of the organizers as well, I decided to jump in. I do want to start out, I think it's been a year since we've done the last congressional briefing, and we're here again. I just want to breathe in for a second because we're here again. I want to start off with a poem, even though we're here to talk about science and data. This is a poem that I wrote. It's called Echad, which means one, means unity. May we learn to see the sacred spark in every person. May we learn to see that glowing warm light in ourselves and through the eye of a stranger. May we become agents in the ongoing of creation, Riyat Olam, the creation of the world. May our day-to-day actions inspire the spread of a canopy of peace that protectively hovers over and within you, your loved ones, and those will never meet. And I think I wanted to start with that because that's kind of the essence of why all the various organizations came together today to talk about data, to talk about science, to talk about experiences, that narrowing the gap between science and practice. And I'm just more than thrilled that the academies and major national organizations have come together today a year after the last one. And since that time, there have been so many mass shootings and school violence incidences, community violence incidences, that we feel that our voices need to be amplified even further. And I'm glad that you're all here to integrate, to learn, and to exchange with us afterwards. As you know, this is one of the most critical issues facing our nation. The recent polls that have come out in different studies, both from UCLA, from Pew, and from Pace in California, show that for California voters at least, school shootings has become the #1 educational issue for voting registered voters. Kids in different states are ranking the effects of the shooting, including all the drills and all the things that come with it, as probably one of the largest things that's affecting their educational experiences. And you hear about it all the time, unfortunately, because of the events that keep on happening over and over and over again in our country. So in that kind of context that we're here, once again, hopefully this will be a setting where we could work productively and we could actually have, rather than just our own opinions and our own thoughts, have data drive some of the decision-making and the policy that needs to be put forth and guide our country. We do believe that following this path actually will improve the lives of millions. There's a lot more. The Congressional Research Institute for Social Work and Policy, Charles Lewis, who has been literally every day on the phone with me and making sure that we got this room and making the connections. Thank you, Charles. Rick Barth, who ran Challenges of Social Work, almost done. And the National Association for Rural and Mental Health, Ron Manderchield, and National Association of County and Behavioral and Developmental Disability Directors, also Ron. And finally, the School Social Work Association of America, Rebecca Oliver, Myrna Mandlowitz, Michelle Alvarez, Jim Rain, Christy McCoy, and Megan Berkowitz, and Susan Daly. This wouldn't happen at all without a budget, as we just had right now, without any kind of just word of mouth and going around without these people working very, very hard. So thank you for taking the time, for allowing me to say their names. Now, without further ado, I want to introduce our panelists that you've been waiting to hear. I will just do this very briefly, but I want to let you know that I'm just so honored to be with this group of people here. These are not just researchers, these are warriors, peace warriors, who are dedicated to narrowing the research practice gap, to finding the best solutions worldwide of things that work, and it is my deepest honor to be sitting on this panel with these panelists here. We'll go in the order that we're sitting, but I just would like to briefly say Dr. Sean Joe from the Washington University in St. Louis will be focusing his work on suicide intervention and weapons, particularly, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, in the African American community, and his work in St. Louis that's on the ground and ground up as well. If you have time, he'll have other kinds of time for questions on his community work. Dorothy Espelage, who's at that side of the table, is at the University of Florida now, soon to be the University of North Carolina, I believe, has been a crusader for decades. Literally, if you're on Facebook or Instagram with her, she is in a different place in the world every day, advocating and working hard towards a more peaceful world, in particular schools that will be safer. Marlene Wong, who's sitting right next to her, has probably the person in the world that has seen and has healed more children after school shootings than anyone in the world. She has coordinated almost every school shooting that's happened in the United States, and she has wisdom in terms of what is needed for prevention and for healing afterwards. She's also worked with UCLA and RAND to come up with intervention studies that have been highly effective and used across the world. Pia Escudero, who is at the end of the table, is probably overseeing the largest school social work and psychology and counseling staff in the world, I believe. Maybe there's a few countries that are more. She's the head of LAUSD's multiple programs, and she's going to talk about what they're doing and what they're struggling with and things that they would like suggest changing so that they could help, from their experiences, improve the lot of children across the United States. And Lauren Hogue, sitting right next to me. Many of you know her, and you know her brother and her mother, who are sitting here, Rebecca Boldrick, who's sitting right here, videotaping. We testified last year as well together, and she's been very vocal on national TV, on radio, articles. She's written a book, and she's here to tell us what her experiences have been in this year and what she thinks from her perspective as an advocate, as a survivor, and as the voice, the only voice in our room right now here on the panel of kids who are still in school. So, and that's very, very important to us. So without further ado, I'd like to start with Lauren. Each of our panelists will have a max of 9 minutes, and then we will have a half-hour question-and-answer discussion with the rest of the audience. Thank you.
Hi guys, my name's Lauren, as you just heard, and I just finished my sophomore year at Stoneman Douglas, so I'm happy about that. It's finally started. And oftentimes, I see a lot of my administrators talking and trying to figure out the best ways to help students that still go to my school and deal with gun violence every single day. And the main problem is they don't talk to us, they don't ask us, they don't ask the people that actually went through the shooting what we need mental health-wise. Unfortunately, I've also seen that a lot at the federal level with our politicians, talking about how they're going to help their constituents, but not actually talking to their constituents. So I've seen similar power structures in regards to that. looking back, I think one of the biggest things that I've learned is within regards to my own mental health and not recovering, but dealing with the weight of what happened at my school that day, every single day, is that things are less heavy when the weight is shared. And by that I mean, in regards to what happened, the thing that I have found to be the most helpful with my recovery is talking with friends. And I know that sounds so superficial, but genuinely being with people that are good to you and that have, in my case, experienced similar things to what I've experienced has really helped me progress. I think when I think back to what happened, a lot of people ask why we became activists or whatever. And I think being an activist doesn't mean not having any fears. It doesn't mean being fearless, cool person, which it just isn't. It's having things to fear, but not letting those things stop you. And I think within regards to what happened last year, or the year before, sorry, time is just warped in my head. I feel as though every single student that walked out of my school after the shooting that day were forced to become activists. They were forced to have something to fear, but they were also forced to live with it every single day and to still get up and out of bed. So it now has been 1.5 years since the shooting happened at my school, and going to school every single day has genuinely been a struggle. And to see how my school has reacted after what happened has been almost heartbreaking in a sense. The media left, right? It's still there, but the media never really covered the mental health aspect of what happens after a mass shooting, and they usually don't. I mean, it's the media cycle. They enjoy covering the shooting when it happens. They stay there for a couple months, or in some instances just 2 weeks, and then they leave. And that's been one of the hardest things, to see the media leave and not cover, a lot of media, not cover the true story of what it's like living in a town that has experienced such tragedy. And I just want to also recognize that today is the anniversary of Pulse Nightclub, and I want to recognize that 49 people lost their lives that day, and the media only stayed there for 2 weeks. They call it the 2-week cutoff, and it's really important to, I know this isn't about the bias of the media or anything like that, but recognize that because of the individuals that died that day, because they were mostly part of minority groups, the media didn't cover them. And the media especially did not continue to cover their mental health going forward, unfortunately. But I just want to acknowledge that whenever a mass tragedy happens, you need to ensure that even if you weren't affected, that you yourself are okay, because we deal with this every single day. I mean, you guys see it on the news. Every single day, we have become almost accustomed to seeing horrible things happen. And I think, really, when you see these things happen, and you decide to speak out on them, even if you weren't affected, that in itself is an act of resilience and an act of rebellion in a sense, because we're so accustomed to these things. That the fact that we even decide that you guys even came today is amazing to me, so thank you for that. But I think the first step is always caring, right? The first step is always actually listening to people that were affected and listening to experts on different issues that you care about. And something that I also want to acknowledge is, after hearing what everybody has to say today, I think we have failed you and you have failed us if you don't leave this room today and continue to talk about and tell other people about what you learned here today. Even if it's just one thing, that would really mean everything. Also, within regards to different issues and mental health, it's important to overcome this barrier of this stigma that we deal with every single day. Unfortunately, that's something that I really have realized is very, very present in today's society. I don't really know why, but I just want to make sure that you guys realize that this is a safe zone, and you
violence that we do to each other, and often leaving out what accounts for most of the violence and most of the death, and that's self-directed violence. That means suicide specifically, not self-interest behaviors, but those leading to death. So as we think about this and to put it in this right context, what often happens when we focus on interpersonal violence is that you stimulate the public fear, and the public fear is the model that often legislation is usually driven by, rather than our fear that we're losing loved ones, families, fathers, uncles, daughters, and children under the ages of 12 to suicide in this country each year. Suicide in the United States, about almost 50,000 people die every year from suicide. Every year. I remember when it averaged about 30,000 about 20 years ago. Now it's about 50,000. That means individuals are coming to the conclusion that life is not worth living. The pain is too much, that I don't see a way forward. So we look at it as a result or as a tipping spear of how people are experiencing the American experience overall. And it's important that we pay attention to this, particularly as we're talking about gun violence. So what does this mean? It means on average, one person every 11 minutes kill themselves in the United States. One male every 14 minutes, one female every 50 minutes. So by the time we're done here, at least 2 additional people have killed themselves in the United States. We're talking on average that in addition to the almost 50,000 people who die every year, we see well over 1.5 million attempted suicides that result in injury that we know about. And then overall, that suggests that that's an undercount of what's happening in the United States. So when we look at firearm violence, we're talking about 60% of them are suicides, but we don't hear a lot about them. Our strategy to match our investment in preventing suicide does not match that reality. So we have an opportunity here to really think about that going forward. So suicide accounts for 1 out of every 5 deaths among young people in the United States. It's the 3rd leading cause of death among those 15 to 24. Among black adolescents, young black adolescents under the age of 12, so I should say children, have higher rates of suicide now than white children. You're talking babies. You're talking young people who have not moved fully past the first decade of life, who are making a decision that at this point, life is not worth living and seeking means to end their life. So the idea of looking at suicide is very important. We know that about 25,000 firearm suicide deaths occur every year on average now, and we've been watching this grow over the last 10 years. In 2017, there were about 40,000 gun deaths, and again, as I said, more than 60% of those were suicides. Suicide rates are much higher in states where gun ownership, even after controlling for differences among poverty, urbanization, unemployment, mental illness, and alcohol or drug use, suicide are higher in states that has least restrictions on access to lethal means than in states that have more restriction on access to lethal means. So what are we talking about? If you're in the mountain states, if you're in part of the southern states, and if you're in the Midwest states, your rates of suicides are higher than states that has more protections regarding limiting access to lethal means. So these are important things for us to understand overall. So, and lethal means often must be considered because when you engage in suicidal behavior, if you use a firearm, you're 95% more likely to die. If you don't use a firearm, that means suffocation, medicine, anything you might ingest, you only have a 5% chance of dying. If it involves a gun, 95% chance of dying. If it doesn't, 5%. So these are important things for us to consider overall as we're thinking about addressing the issue of lethal weapons and violence in communities and schools. So, and I bring up the issue of schools because again, we're talking a lot of school-age children. Again, suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death among school-age children, ages 15 to 24, and that's irregardless of ethnic background. People engage in interpersonal violence. real lives here. We're talking about enough people that can fill any baseball stadium in this region every year. Every year, and some more who will be outside waiting to get in. I don't make light of it, I just want you to understand the magnitude of what we're talking about. You must understand, if you put it in context, if we know that 3,000 people died on September 11th, we're talking how many more times that? Who are dying every year. And suicide is preventable. So I mean, farm-related suicide is preventable. So we have to look at that. I'm checking my time because I'm a faculty member and we can go over. So, so let me close out real quickly with this, is that there are things you can consider. One, eliminate the ban or any restriction or any legacy of such restrictions on the ability of the CDC to conduct and monitor suicide violence in this country, and particularly farm-related violence. Two, fully fund the National Violent Death Reporting System, which gives us comprehensive information about how people die by gun injury and other violent injury, not just guns. Three, it's important that we take a stand and we want to see zero suicides, and we must allow our systems, and SAMHSA and others, to push that our systems for mental health care and behavioral health care takes a stand, that we must have real good training requirements for those who are doing the work. Most professionals get no training around suicide. And lastly, there's a middle ground that we all can focus on. It's called counseling on access to lethal means. What we're finding that this is much more palatable in our state of Missouri and elsewhere, that Kathy Barber and others from Harvard have been advancing this idea. Basically, if someone is in crisis, create an opportunity to counsel them, to say, help me put aside your lethal means. I don't want to own anything, I don't want to prevent you. Just right now, I love you, and that's more important, that you put this aside. But in order to do that, you must also have safe storage capacity to hold those and return them. These are common sense things that we can do, and I look forward to our continued discussion.
Thank you, Sean. It's critical. I'd like to turn next to Dr. Marlene Wong. Marlene has been, I believe, in 5 White House conferences on this particular issue and countless congressional briefings over the last 2 or even more decades. More, yes. So thank you for being here and welcome.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for being here today. I think your concern and your attention to these topics are very important in order for us to move forward with healing our nation and also addressing the challenges that we face today. First, I want to make a point that the culture of education has changed over many years, and if you were born before 1985, you did not know what a school shooting was. If you were born after 1985 or after, you entered kindergarten in 1990 in the middle of a whole spate of school shootings across the country. And at that particular time, you couldn't turn on the television, still pick up a newspaper then, and read about what was going on in the news. So school safety has trumped education, the issues about reading and math. Parents are concerned. Their first question is this a safe school? My own experience began in 1984 when we had one of the first school shootings in Los Angeles in the country. 1984, the 49th Street Elementary School. A mentally ill man lived across the street from the elementary school, and at 2:30 in the afternoon, when the children were coming out, he held the school under sniper fire for an hour and a half, killing a child, an adult, and seriously wounding many of the children and the school staff. Since then, we've learned a great deal, and across the country, the science of trauma has really developed, and brain science is now very much a part of what we know about trauma. And I think my concern is that we know a lot about how children and adults respond to these incidents of mass violence, to school shootings, etc. And everything we know comes from war. It comes from PTSD and the experience of wounded warriors who survived terrible conflict. I worry that educators sometimes, in their rush to restore the learning environment, engage in a kind of denial, that somehow they're more concerned about control of the situation, whether it's about control about how students access their prevention programs. The young man who perpetrated this terrible, terrible, horrific crime had hundreds of contacts with people, whether they were law enforcement, whether they were mental health, whether they were educators, and somehow that didn't all come together. And I think we're learning more about it every day, and more we're so alarmed about that. So everybody knows kind of what to do in their own area, but we need to come together to make a central commitment that whatever our role is, we're working together, the community, the school, law enforcement, mental health, to provide preventive services to children. And then when they experience trauma, that we are able and trained to provide trauma-informed services. In many of the situations I've been called into, and including some terrorist attacks in different parts of the country, the stories from the victims are horrific. Horrific not because people didn't step up and want to help them, but because they were referred to people who were not prepared. In one terrorist attack, the victim, the survivor, said to me, I spoke with my therapist and she said, stop, I can't hear this anymore. Another said, I'm not trained to do this. Another said, started crying and could not stop. And the survivor was comforting the therapist. These are common stories. People are not trained to do this very, very important work. So prevention services need to be in schools, mental health services need to be in schools, and we need to have communication at all levels. We can't define this as a school problem, it is a community problem. We used to say the school is an oasis of calm in communities of chaos. Guess what? The chaos is everywhere now, because we can't think about it that way. A couple of things I want to bring up. Access. My colleagues at RAND did a study in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, randomized 120 children, 60 to a school-based intervention, 60 to a community clinic intervention. Both were at the level that reached the gold standard. They were evidence-based. Randomized clinical trials were not in question. But of the 60 that were randomized to the clinic treatment, nine students completed all the sessions. That's 15%. Of the services provided in schools, of the 60 students, I'm going to make sure I get this right, 55 completed all 10 sessions. And lastly, I want to talk about legislation for you to look at, not legislation, lawsuits. It's strange for a social worker to be talking about lawsuits, but I'm proud to say it's one of the subject matter or pro bono experts on this. So please look this up when you have an opportunity. Peter P. versus Compton Unified School District. It's about trauma. It's about trauma-informed services, and it's about a student who through his entire time in Compton Unified did not receive one referral either in the school or to a community clinic, and was culminated in his arrest when he was homeless and he realized if he slept on the cafeteria, the roof of the cafeteria, he would not be assaulted, and then law enforcement was brought in. The other is Stephen C. versus the Bureau of Indian Education, the Havasu Pike tribe. And similar situation, exposed to trauma, exposed to all of the adverse childhood experiences that one child could have. But in these case laws being laid down right now, that schools as a part of 504 accommodations and IDEA must provide services to children as part of what is a free and appropriate education, which is a civil right. So thank you, let's all work together and let's get us all on the right track. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlene. And we will go next to Dorothy Espalage, who has been working in an array of different areas. I believe today you're going to be focusing on youth empowerment.
I will be.
School resources.
Yeah.
So thank you.
So thank you so much for being here. Let me be here for sure. So it's been a quarter century that I've been studying school violence and bullying, violence against teachers, more recently training school police, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that. So 25 years of research in 9 minutes. Let's do it. And so I want to bring it back. It is that youth had knowledge of mental health challenges of their friends, of even potentially some lethal over again from middle schools and high school students that there is an attempt to communicate, but there's ways in which it either comes back and there's retaliation on their part, and then they become just really kind of apathetic, if you will, over time. Post-Parkland, the attitudes of the high school students changed, and I think that's because they saw their face on the national news and in the march last year. They saw their voice finally being heard, and as I said last year, they also felt that the adults had failed them. If you spend a lot of time in schools, you can see that, especially when you have a school of 3,500 kids, how do you build communication and trust with such a large student body? So we did a lot of focus groups. Post-Parkland, the snitch culture was minimized a little bit. They were energized in our schools to help us create a reporting app called the Advocator. That's funded by the National Institutes of Justice, that will be free for every school in this country. It holds adults accountable. They cannot say, well, I forgot to follow through on that. This is going to be a reporting app that's not confidential. It's confidential, not anonymous. The kids also pay attention to this. We heard over and over again, I'd like to hear your comments on this, Lauren, that they do a pretty good job of addressing our physical safety with their walkie-talkies and their metal detectors, but they ignore all of the issues we have around emotional safety. We heard this over and over again from high school students. There's no mechanism to talk about some mental health challenges that I'm having or my peers are having. So insisted when they develop the app with us, with the tech company, they can report both physical safety and emotional safety and get resources. So stay tuned on the Advocator. We're doing a pilot test, and we hope that if the Comprehensive School Safety Initiative come back, we can actually do a large-scale RCT of that and get it in the hands of folks in this country. I'm very happy that you mentioned suicide, because we are currently in one of those mountain states, Colorado, where we are evaluating the youth, this is the theme, youth-led intervention called Sources of Strength. Sources of Strength, that is evidence-based for suicidal ideation, not behavior, but suicidal ideation. If it's on the Registry of Evidence-Based Programs for increasing help-seeking behavior in high school students, by destigmatizing help-seeking behavior, by improving the number of trusted adults and trusted peers in a building, and we do that by training high school students to be peer advocates, to run student campaigns, to address mental health issues under the slight supervision of high school faculty advisors. We're evaluating currently for sexual violence outcomes. Again, stay tuned for that, but the common theme there is peer-led interventions, youth voice, addressing connectedness, improving trusted communications across the board. Now, I happen to live in Florida, and so Florida, if you follow the legislation, when we were funded by the National Institutes of Justice to train SROs, school resource officers, called school police. Not sure why we call them SROs, they're school police. They were populated in mostly the middle schools and the high schools in the state of Florida. Now we have a legislation that every school has to have an SRO. Well, there's not enough police officers in the state. So we've now created other job descriptions like security specialists, campus monitors, guardians, some of which are asking to be able to carry a firearm. I was in Broward County last week training their security specialists because that's the only security professionals they have control over in Broward County there. And I sat with these security specialists, this is a positive thing, 60 of them, 2 of which from MSD. And they were soaking up the trauma-informed professional development work we were doing, social-emotional learning, restorative justice and problem solving, and cultural competence. What I also heard from them is they don't want to carry a gun because they know the minute they carry the gun, the relationship with that student changed. They become police, and we know exactly. So it was powerful to be there. To also hear Superintendent Runcie and his head of security saying we are not going to arm security specialists, that we need to have trusted adults without guns attached to them because those kids really look up to them. The minute you put a gun on your body, it changes that. And so we're doing lots of work, very excited. Again, that online professional development, we need Comprehensive School Safety Initiative to come back so that we can figure out the implementation. If anything knows anything about online professional development, it has to be meaningful, it has to involve coach embeddedness, it has to be real. And for security professionals in our schools, they have lots of incidents that would look different if we were able to slow this down, have them take a trauma-informed approach, understand their own trauma, understand their own social emotional competencies and where they're lacking, understanding that punitive approaches have failed us, that restoring and healing is appropriate, and for also people to understand that many of us come from different backgrounds. The student populations are changing tremendously. So when I could talk to security professionals last week about how do you interact with a trans individual which you don't understand, how do you work with students with disabilities when you don't have that training? In many states,
among peaceful warriors and follow such amazing colleagues, and also my previous boss and mentor, Marlene Wong. I'm leveraging a little bit about what she's already spoken about. I wrote it down. I have more than 7, 8, 9 minutes, so please bear with me. I have so much to share. We're all very passionate about this. So as I drive into the office every day, I make a conscientious decision to drive through the surface streets of Los Angeles to my office in downtown. This allows me the opportunity to witness the reality of our 600,000 students. Every day our students attend 1,300 campuses. We teach infants, kindergartners, through 12th grade adults, and they represent 90 languages. In any given day, 86% of our students are on free and reduced lunch programs, and at least 18,000 are homeless, and 5,000 foster students. Yet, despite these adversities, our students come to school every day to learn and thrive, as schools have become critical buffers of supports in the lives of our children and families. The other day, as I was driving in and I was preparing for this, I recalled the experience that has become one of my career highlights. I was approached by a young counselor who asked me if I had ever worked at 20th Street Elementary. In fact, I had back in 1990. She said she recalls being in the 3rd grade, and I would pull her out of class, and I would speak to her and help her through her many issues that she faced as a 9-year-old. She never forgot those counseling sessions and later became a social worker, graduating from UC Berkeley, and today she's one of our staff members helping her own community. Our ultimate goal with this work has to be about empowering and supporting our children to become the professionals and leaders that they can be. Our youth have potential to seek any passion that drives them, given the right opportunities, to address inevitable adversities they will experience. They are our future social workers, nurses, doctors, and helpers who can make a difference in the community, in our communities and in the world. And we happen to have a shortage of them right now. As you've heard from my colleagues, the science behind the impacts of trauma and the prevalence of trauma in our student population calls for urgent funding and prioritizing opportunities for prevention and early intervention. See, if trauma is left untreated, it can determine your health outcomes, it can determine whether you graduate, it'll determine your ultimate life opportunities and even how long you live, and definitely determined by your zip code, as Marlene just mentioned. In my 30 years as a school social worker, I have learned that being compassionate and caring does not really require additional funding. Yet funding is critical and necessary to build the capacity of adults, as was mentioned today, so they know why and how they can support resiliency. All adults, parents, and caregivers in the school community play a pivotal role in promoting student outcomes. With proper funding and resources, we can educate all school stakeholders about the science and impact of trauma on child development. Every adult should know. We need to teach about systems change and the opportunities to become trauma and resilient, informed school communities. We can build on individual and community assets despite risk factors. And we must teach our children every day, regardless of their developmental age and stage is in their lives, about social-emotional skills such as empathy, anger management, problem solving, goal setting, so they can gain tools and strategies to address adversities that they will face, grief, and trauma triggers. For students to learn that seeking counseling and mental health supports throughout their lifespan is healthy and right. It's very important for adults to build their capacity to understand what it means to be regulated, so they can co-regulate a child who is especially at risk in needing additional supports when they demonstrate behaviors such as harmful to themselves, harmful to others, stop those as students and adults who are on trajectory towards violence, because if left untreated or unmonitored or services are lacking, we will continue to experience incidents that may lead to tragedies on our campuses. This is why I came from Los Angeles the last week of school to talk to you about this, to tell you what is working, to tell you what we can expand on, what we can build upon. And by fortifying and building our current efforts, it's Congress' opportunity and our federal government to prioritize and provide robust funding for the Student Support and Academic Enrichment Grant, which is also known as Title IV A-Block grants, which are currently being considered, including nursing and psychiatric social workers, beginning in this July 2018 school year that we just finished, we launched a dedicated partnership between Los Angeles School Police Department and our team, Student Health and Human Services and School Mental Health, where we matched mental health practitioners to school police officers. We have 6 teams, and we are able to respond to schools. This first year, the watch commander and school police took 1,850 calls of suicidal and calls where they had to respond, triage, and assess students. They also provide technical support. Out of the 1,850 calls, we evaluated 982 students or adults. That's 53%. And out of those, 25% were transported to medical facility. We're really honed in on preventing the psychiatric hospitalization because we know that's not the answer. Every month, we also convene the LA TARP, which is a threat assessment response partners. School police, LAPD, the Department of Mental Health, DCFS, city attorneys, and all these county and city partners review high-risk cases. We develop a collaborative action plan and support one another and address incidents that mitigate threats and and possibly other violent events. These are colleagues that are on my speed dial. They're a phone call away, and they have become integral relationships to address some very complex situations that we deal with every day. Next school year, we're mandating all school staff to have one trauma-resilient informed professional development, and we're also developing a micro-credential for teachers to know about this work. We have screened universally 18,000 students this year, and consistently, for the last 20 years, the numbers are consistent. About a quarter of our students screen very high for traumatic stress and another 20% for moderate risk. That means half of our students may need special attention. When we have targeted screening, 80% of our students report 3 or more stressful events, half of our students positive for PTSD, a quarter for depression, a quarter for anxiety, and 25% of our students report substance abuse. Okay, so we will continue to improve school culture, climate, physical and emotional safety. We plan to increase the number of schools that are currently practicing this trauma-informed work, and we have spread meditation and mindfulness across schools. We've even begun to have a wellness room for students and a wellness room for staff so they can learn how to regulate and really address some of the issues they may face during the day. So we're at a fork in the road, and that's why I'm so passionate to be here. We can continue to fund pathology. That means children needing to be hospitalized for psychiatric crises, incarcerating our youth in juvenile hall, or removing children from families into foster or group home. Or we can fund prevention and early intervention, creating welcoming and inclusive schools where all adults inoculate children from the adversities and families that have access to resources. Going back to my commute every day, this is what I envision and I see. Our families and communities thriving because they're invested and empowered in their school communities. They have the opportunity to build upon their strengths and know how to protect and support healthy child development, where children and families have access to full health, mental health, and other resources, and where schools are fully funded so that teachers can teach and students can thrive and maximize their full potential. Thank you.
Thank you, Pia. And just one more, and then we'll have question and answer. I'll introduce myself. I'm me, not somebody else. I'm Ron Astor. And I'm going to focus in very specifically on what I passed out, that you have weapons reductions in schools. This is a policy brief that Rami Zamanishti, my colleague, and I did with the American Psychological Association, and Sharon Nichols, who helped lead that effort, is here in the room. Actually, it's her birthday, so happy birthday to you, Sharon. We do work that's very similar to what was mentioned here, including suicide. Everything we do is youth-informed and youth-led in terms of youth voice. There's a lot I won't cover, but it's in our welcoming practices and in our mapping and monitoring book that we've written for practitioners. That is being used in all schools in Israel and most schools in Chile and other places around the world. One of the things that bothered me after we've been doing these close to 30 years of work is that we weren't talking about weapons themselves. We were talking about the prevention, and I think once we went into the zero tolerance mode and we saw the reaction of our country to actually create the school to prison pipeline, as a result, we just stopped talking about it. But I just want to make it really clear that our data in California and other places around the United States is showing that there's still weapons in schools. We need to figure out ways, and kids are complaining about it. It's very, very difficult for them to be studying in school if they hear through the grapevine, that's what I'm going to talk about today, that there's a knife, by the way, not just firearms. Here, we're just talking about California right now. We're not talking about the whole country. We're just talking about California. You're talking about being threatened, with a weapon. Again, that could be ranging on the year about 175,000. And we have all these outlined and the chapter behind it if you want the background. But the biggest piece that is almost untalked about is the number of kids who know about it, who see it, who hear it through the grapevine. And there consistently, year by year, we see that it's about between 20 to 25% of kids in California hear about a weapon on school grounds. And think about how cynical it is to be writing this on a survey to the state. It's a formal survey, never comes back. Nobody talks about it at school. Teachers don't know about it always, that their kids have reported it on a consistent basis. District uses it sometimes for all sorts of administrative reasons. Our focus was that we need to bring that data back. We need to bring that data back to the schools, back to the teachers, back to the kids, have focus groups, discussion, because these are the voices of the kids, the voices. And we've seen pretty dramatic reductions in weapon use when that's being done, in addition to all the things that all our other panelists have talked about, putting student voice in the center kind of as a check and balance to, are you taking care of this problem, is very important to us. So we feel that if the districts and the faculty are not taking weapons on campus, I'm not talking about school shootings, I'm not talking about tragedies of what we've been focusing on, I'm talking about going way, way, way back in terms of prevention right now. Just weapons on campus, without suspending, without expelling, without all these draconian measures that we've seen in the past. If we can't handle this as a community and the school, what kind of society and vision are we creating in general? And it's, again, a cynical situation where students are consistently reporting it, and it's not being fed back or actually being used actively on school grounds. And that's what we were concerned about here, and these are recommendations that come out of this. So just letting you know that if you do all the things that our panelists talked, and we did this with our Hunter, Marlene Wong was a co-PI on that project. We did it for about 4 years, and we followed the schools for about another 4 years out, and those reductions are continuing. So if you do all those social emotional things, you keep student voice in the center, you bring resources around like was brought up here, and evidence-based programs. We had a 55% reduction in guns being brought on school grounds, and that's in 145 schools with 120,000 kids. 38% reduction in all other kinds of weapons being brought onto school grounds. 40% reduction in kids seeing or knowing about a weapon. And if you multiply this in the United States, we're talking about millions of kids having a different school experience to and from school. And we didn't expect this, but a 44% reduction in gang affiliation, actually. And when we did the focus group with kids afterwards, our colleagues and a lot will turn out were these social emotional kinds of discussions that they had friends to talk to now. They had other peer groups that were supportive. They had teachers and coaches and bus drivers and cafeteria people that they could turn to. It wasn't just a counselor or a social worker or a psychologist. It was more of a community, more of a vision of what we want our society really to be. And this is what we heard back from the students. So in terms of recommendations, because I want to leave enough time for question and answer, I think we need to go a couple of steps back in all the proposed legislation and not just talk about responding to mass shootings. We need to be talking not just about guns. We need to be talking about threats and weapons in general, the knowledge of it. Nobody is arguing Second Amendment that kids should have to deal with that kind of thing, or that they can carry guns. Although a lot of kids are saying they're bringing it for self-protection. So that has to be dealt with and talked about too. But that should be discussed. That should be educated about in schools. That should be part of what we build for a civic society. The second piece is we did a school level analysis in California. We found that there are schools that have really high concentrations that kids are telling us of high guns, high knives. Those could be targeted, those schools, and resources could be amassed specifically, community resources, mental health resources, educational resources, so that those principals and teachers don't feel like they're in a fortress, but they can actually soften, by using softening techniques, actually make the community, think of your own community between each other. Having that public health approach where you identify specific areas could actually reduce the incidence and prevalence rate for the whole state. And we think this is true across the country.
Question, how many Hill staffers are there? Raise your hands. All right. Can you shout out your boss's office?
Maloney, Congressman Maloney.
Congressman Perlmutter.
Congressman Tony Kazan.
Okay. All right. Just wanted to see who was represented. All right. So we have time for a few questions. Yes, in the back there.
Yeah.
And speak up so we.
So I'm from Florida, and as many of you are probably aware, Florida just recently voted to allow teachers to have guns in the classroom in some instances. And so I know there was a discussion about how some SROs aren't armed because having a gun creates a power dynamic with the kids. But I don't know if you can touch upon the power dynamic of having a teacher armed in the classroom.
So I'm just gonna share like my personal experiences with having conversations with many different people, experts included, on what would happen if teachers were armed. And within my personal experience, I just feel as though it's important to say that in my school, on February 14th, the teachers barely had time to lock the door. So to even fathom that they would have time to get a gun out of a cabinet is just unimaginable, and it wouldn't have been effective in my case. Along with that, it's been proven that guns in the classroom are just going to create more gun violence. There's been many cases, I forgot exactly where it was, but it was last year, and the teacher did have a gun in the classroom, it wasn't in Florida, and he accidentally shot it off, and it went through the wall. So I just cannot stress enough how much that would be ineffective. And upon that, I mean, teachers get paid less than full-time workers at McDonald's in Florida. So to think that all of a sudden, I mean, my school doesn't even have enough money to have paper sometimes. To think that all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they would somehow have enough funding to purchase guns for teachers, or the fact to even think that teachers would have enough money themselves to spend on purchasing guns, it's unfathomable, and it's just unrealistic for everybody involved.
So I'll add to that. So we've done quite a bit of work looking at violence directed toward teachers in the classroom. And national data every year show that 7% of our teachers are hospitalized because of violence in the classroom. I'm not saying it's just because it's the interaction between the student and the teacher, but that statistic itself should cause concern for then you're adding a weapon there. And if you are an SRO, you do carry a gun. So school resource officers are school police under sheriff, or unless the school district has their own police department. The question in many states, and hopefully folks will not follow Florida's lead, is to should you arm, in addition to the teachers, the security specialists, the guardians, and campus monitors. But I think based on the science that classrooms are violent, at this point adding a weapon is problematic, but that's also a body of research that's been quite ignored by this federal government.
Also, I just want to do a quick little poll. Raise your hand if you've ever had a teacher that you would not want to have a gun. There you go. Answer solved. Congratulations, democracy.
I mean, just to follow up just to follow up on that, I mean, for those of us who have been in the trenches for the years too, I mean, this isn't collected, Nash, but I can tell you at least of a dozen situations where teachers have shot other teachers and principals in heat of passion, and it, you know, makes maybe the local news or whatever. If that was collected in a regular way, and I think teachers don't even want it nationally, I think they've been pretty vocal about it. But I think there's been a sense of, if you increase that number, you don't know amongst school staff the potential of harm amongst in a spat of anger. So I just think reducing the number of guns in general is a better strategy from all the public health research that has been allowed. And if we want to get less people shot, less people threatened, less people having very focused, like Dorothy mentioned, people who are trained, at least, and who want to be doing this kind of work would be important.
But let me make a point there. Even if that is true, what's most important is that you must know whether that is true. You have to have the data.
That's right.
And because you have a culture that no one wants, if the federal government does not want to collect the data, if the state government does not want to collect the data, then what we have is your hypothesis versus my hypothesis, which leads to chaos.
Absolutely.
So even if you don't want to take sides, you must have data.
Right.
And I just want to raise the fact that my understanding is that this year the allocation is $1 million. I think that's dismal, and I think just by the fact that it's called a block grant means that there's competition and certain people get it and certain people don't. And it should be a straightforward allocation to all schools to have these systems in place. And
they've been learning about ACEs for years. Now we're teaching them how to assess and how to talk to children. They're even wearing different uniforms so that they have khakis and polos. And so to have adults that are able to de-escalate and mitigate a situation is very different than having a law enforcement. We work with 18 law enforcement, different cities in Los Angeles, and there's an array of training where a gun can be drawn in a school quickly or mitigate that opportunity of not drawing a gun. So I think it begins with education. There's so much that we've learned about the brain science. And it's fascinating when we go to schools, teachers don't know. They have their own trauma, so they stay away from it, or they want kids hospitalized, or expelled, or sent to, but it's shifting, and it's shifting, but it's not enough. We need to infuse it, we need to have people learn this in college and in their professional, and we have to have youth understand how the brain works so they can know how to regulate themselves, right? But I've never worked in my 30 years with a city, a state, a country that is unregulated and dysregulated, and it's a trickle down, so you are seeing a lot of pathology today.
Yeah, I'd like to just add to that one of the areas that's missing that maybe you want to consider in terms of infusing into different legislation is the universities. We're culprits in this ourselves. As Pia mentioned, our teacher training programs, principal training programs, superintendent training, don't cover almost any of this. All the stuff we talked about. So it creates a situation where you need large funding streams afterwards to re-educate all the principals and teachers, all the stuff that we just talked about that they never learned or see as part of their job. So I think if there is incentive at the university level so that people going into those positions actually know that this is what's available, this is what they're supposed to do, this is how it should be structured, that would be very helpful, and I think it would be very hard to arm those people at that time if that happened. So I think somehow engaging the universities not on the research piece, but on the education training piece for social workers, psychologists, teachers. I would add superintendents, and there are training programs for school boards right now too. The educational piece would be very, very strong, particularly around what works and what doesn't work, because universities could do that very easily.
With the National Association of Social Workers. I'm the Director of Policy there. This is an excellent panel. It's wonderful to see social work professors here on the Hill. I have a question about practice. Lawmakers, staffers in the room may not know if social workers are even employed in schools. It would be helpful if you could kind of share the availability of social workers and other mental health providers, their role and their contribution in schools and other settings.
Well, I'm happy to speak about that in terms of the University of Southern California. It's actually the largest cohort of students that we have, and it's an area where social workers bring their skills and knowledge to prevention programs in terms of supporting resilience among students, all the way through tertiary kinds of services where they are taught trauma-informed interventions. So social workers are playing, at least in California, a larger role every day around crisis intervention, threat assessment. They're an integral part of a law enforcement community-based team, as well as mental health professionals. So I think social workers, I used to be that of the licensed professionals providing psychotherapy, 68% were licensed clinical social workers. And I don't know if that number has increased or not, but maybe you'd be able to bring us up to speed on that.
I think that's about right. I would have to go home and read some reports, but I think it's helpful for this group to understand whether there are mental health professionals actually in schools across the country.
Yeah.
I just want to add that I actually run the school mental health program and the pupil services attendance program, and they're both primarily social workers. And combined, I think we're close to 1,200 social workers, primarily social workers. And what's interesting about that is that when schools have more funding, they purchase more social workers. So this year, our schools, because of LA LCAP dollars, they have more fundings. We have the highest increase on schools purchasing social workers to be part of their team. And just like Marlene said, it's great to have partnerships with agencies, and we have many partnerships. But when they're part of the staff and they're part of influencing policy and the school climate on the ground, there's a tremendous shift.
This young lady here.
I'm with APA, I'm the Society for Psychological Social Issues. I'm also a doctoral candidate at Portland State University in Portland, Oregon.
One thing in particular that's been going on our campus was a recent armament of campus security against the pushback of students, faculty, and staff.
And putting firearms on campus infuses something into the student university culture that puts a lot of people at risk. That's my current assessment of it, but it must be thought about very carefully. You can have law enforcement officers with guns, but you have to have some level of training for them for that corps.
I think it's there has to be some balance on the university, and I know that universities as a whole are reporting more students entering freshman year with mental health challenges. So there has to be corresponding mental health services. In addition to that, threats across university campuses have increased a great deal. There have been, at least in Los Angeles, 2 professors, one at UCLA, one at USC, both of whom were killed, one with a gun, one stabbed, I think, 57 times. But we're looking at now a changing culture again. So to think that there's going to be one answer, I think, is to reduce this violence, a very complex issue, into a gun or not a gun. It's not just that. And science has taught us that we can do a great deal in prevention, again, around the issue of healing and addressing mental health needs.
We've done some work at universities as well, and I think in some ways the answer to the university is not all that different than the K-12. We've seen that university students are underutilized in terms of their information that they have about their peers and about their teachers in terms of potential threat. And after Virginia Tech, there was some movement to actually use that information better. But still, if you go to other places in the world, university students are not seen as people that the officers service. The students actually are involved in first aid, they're involved in their first responders. You have much larger groups that are being trained as part of their university training and part of being a citizen in the United States. By the way, high school students are completely capable of doing some of these things, so that they're not so disempowered. They know where to go, they know what to do, and instead of having 10 officers managing tens of thousands, you have tens of thousands of students actually helping out and being part of the solution. So there's different ways of thinking about it, and I think the professionalization of having police officers and just social workers and just psychologists, which I'm very much in favor, is somehow competing in the United States with actually using the students' own power, and that is their knowledge and their relationships, and how to actually use that as a citizen in our society. I think we could learn from other countries on that.
because,
Me-
yes.
Yeah, I used to be a substitute teacher in Northern Virginia. I do.com is my little company. I used to be a substitute teacher. Subs don't even have to be licensed in a lot of states, including Virginia. We have no idea when there's an asymmetric situation. 99% of the time, everything is fine, but you never know when there's gonna be a problem, particularly in middle school. So that's one thing I wanted to pass along. The other thing I wanted to ask, what about external security? I'm just shocked that so many can get into on the campus. I was shocked when the February 14th thing happened, that it was so easy for people to bring things in school and that there weren't any alarms, or there wasn't any security at all, it sounds like, to prevent them from being brought into the building. Is just simply better perimeter security something we can do?
We have that now in Broward.
Yeah, I think just speaking on behalf of that, my school has put in a lot of, now, unfortunately, they're kind of reactive instead of proactive, as many things happen to be, within regards to prevention of these mass tragedies. But within regards to school safety, I think we need to make sure that we are finding a balance between making our schools safe and not turning our schools into prisons. Because when you put so many BSO officers and so many individuals with guns on campus, and you have a checkpoint when you enter in campus, and you look outside and it's just officer after officer, as much as you want to feel safe, there's also this weird phenomenon that I have found at my own school is that when you turn schools into an environment where you're putting so many precautions in, it's telling us.
And I thank you for that. Building upon what you said about a reactive mechanism here, I am appalled many times when I've been at conferences or I have an opportunity to speak, how we compete with questions like how many active shooter trainings do you have and what's the best way to train for that. This is after the math or the cameras or all the security vendors that are coming up and really investing and actually getting a lot of money from this instead of this type of conversation being at the table. And I say that because when you have a chance to survey children and youth in each school to ask them about safety, many times we make assumptions and their voice is very different. We had an LA Times do a long series on a community that's impacted by trauma and community violence, and the reporter spent a lot of time on visiting this community, and they said kids are fearful of being kidnapped. They're fearful of this. They had other issues that we adults did not expect, and yet we were investing money in different strategies. So I think this is something that we need to ask each community and the youth and the teachers and get the answers that are locally instead of jumping into trainings on active shooters or the right technology to really suppress a community. So thank you for that.
We have time for a couple more questions, and our panelists will be around for a little while, so then you can.
I think we have a receptionist, right?
In here. One, you have a question, and then we'll take one more. Yours.
I'm a school-based mental health clinician here in DC, and I heard you talking about kind of integrating the officers and SROs and getting them trauma-informed education. And so I was just wondering practically what that looks like to get a community invested in that, because I was speaking with one of our SROs just recently, and he said that they stopped getting them training for trauma-informed care years ago because other people in the schools were the ones who should be responsible for that. So he hasn't had training on that since, he said 2009. So I'm just wondering what that looks like practically. How does that?
So what it looks like today and what it ought to look like today is we train officers on ACEs, and they have a symposium, and we have all kinds of trainings on suicide prevention and threat assessment. What we're hoping to start next year and build upon is a model where officers come and spend a whole day, hopefully in a school that has a good mental health program, and we have some, where there's meditation and they see it, and they visit special ed classrooms and others so that they spend the whole day, getting the whole science, but also specialize in suicide issues and prevention and assessment and threat assessment. We talk about threat assessment. The most difficult work about a threat assessment is gathering information. Making a unilateral decision on something just based on facts, we need to have really well-trained adults and law enforcement, mental health professionals to really have the best information to really come up with a plan for anybody that's in that trajectory of violence. So I hope that it's not just a whole day, but because I've seen the agenda, we can't put so much, so but numerous days, and we're gonna start with the young, the newly hired officers and new officers and go all the way. But it really does take a lot of investment and time. And we have a police chief. I was gonna say, the police chief and I go hand in hand, and we talk almost every day. So when we have this question about more police or more mental health, it really should be a partnership that coexists together, because we need both as adults that come in with that perspective.
So I'll give you the other side of it. So it's not this simple in every state and every district. Largely your school police are under the sheriff's office. There's no mandated training in the majority of the, across the country for SROs. There's guidelines on what it should look like for their training, but there's no mandatory. You also run up against unions. And so we were slated for an IJ grant to be in Miami-Dade. They have their own school police, so the superintendent can tell them, you know, Bartlett happens, then Chief Moffitt goes away, Chief Lopez comes in and says, I'm requiring no training for my SROs in Miami-Dade. We have to go over to Broward, where we have to work with 37 some sheriff's offices. They control SROs, the school district doesn't. And you're up against even unions when the school district controls security specialists, professionals, campus monitors, guardians. So I don't live in Maryland, I live in Florida. And so it's like, you know, if you've dealt with teachers' unions, yeah, so I think this is real. I think that having been in the schools, and to be honest, in the last 25 years, I've always seen the SRO and the school police as helpful or not helpful, very dichotomized. And you could tell the one that really kind of gets kids, and then it's not a matter of, it really is about who is that person, because you could have a person that matches your color, and the research shows very clearly that they can be just as detrimental in some ways. What we're trying to understand is implicit bias, right? So the level of the extent to which these police officers are bringing their own biases to the table. I think that's why the security specialists, guardians, and campus monitors don't want guns, because they're able to create that level of connection. I think that policing has such a history that is racialized in this country that's real and almost adaptive for a kid of color not necessarily to trust in this person that has historically done really bad things and is not trustworthy. And so I think we need to think about how can we have people in the school building that are not packing, that can establish those relationships of trust. And largely from Professor Astor's work, you know that it comes really, who sets the tone is the principal in the building, the school boards, and hopefully if we can educate them, as we've talked about, then that will trickle down and start building those relationships. But it's real.
Ron, look what happened.
So we just, if you don't see other people as human, just like you, regardless of your skin color and background, you're going to treat them in a dehumanizing way. So it's up for those adults to be able to recognize the humanity in our young people, and it's often ignored. So the implicit bias comes because people don't see the young people that they're working with as even being worthy of their time, although this is their job. So we have to find a way to just hit the nail right on the head.
Closing words, Ron?
No, I don't really. Okay, I just want to thank you all for the work that's yet to be done. And hopefully, if we come back next year or the year, we'll have a lot more legislation, a lot more policies that that we'll hear about that will move our country forward. Thank you. I think we'll be hanging out. We have the room for about for another half.